Sometimes a house collapses quietly, not like in the movies, with walls falling outward and screams drowned out by music. Sometimes a house just quietly settles, as if someone had unscrewed the screws under the foundation, and you suddenly notice a cup is shaking on the table even when no one is touching it. When my husband and I had been living together for 7 years and had already managed to assemble a family, something like a puzzle of habits, funny words, and schedules, I often thought, well, this is stability. He was one of those people about whom they say reliable. He fixes a faucet, moves a wardrobe from a friend, takes someone else's cat to the vet, agrees to help at the last moment because who, if not me? Funny, always on hand, and me closed like a black box where something alive rustles, but no one opens the lid. I got used to his silence the way you get used to the sound of a refrigerator. At some point, you stop hearing it and think that silence is the norm. If he distanced himself, I explained it by his upbringing, male restraint. That's just the way he is. When I wanted to talk, for real, not about a to-do list, he stroked my head, joked, and promised to take me to our favorite bistro. He was always for us, for the picture of two people walking in step. And I believed. It seems that back then I considered faith to be a kind of virtue. Turning a blind eye to little things means choosing love. Little things, however, cast a shadow. He never left his phone with the screen up. He took it with him into the bathroom, even if he was just going to wash up. Sometimes he didn't respond to messages in messengers for a long time. Then car repairs came up, profitable purchases, and more. I'll close it later, don't worry. I asked softly. He answered even softer, as if my anxiety was fragile glass. I'm in control. He said it too calmly, and I'm ashamed to admit it. I hid my wariness because it's inconvenient to be afraid, because it's scary to scare away the good things we had. I got to know his past in fragments. There was that one, the ex, stormy like a thunderstorm in August. If they were remembered, then in the past tense, got by, outgrew, never again. He assured that everything between them burned out and burned him from the inside, and there was so much fatigue in his voice that I was even glad. Here it is, the end. They sometimes crossed paths at work. Well, the city is cramped, nothing can be done. He spoke about it evenly without sparkles in his eyes, and at some point I stopped listening to intonations. And in vain our life creaked comfortably, warm socks on the radiators, a plate of fruit that I forgot to refill anyway, his palm on my back when we fell asleep. He knew how to be attentive in his actions and invisible in his words. I repeatedly brought up the conversation about how I lack simple human things. Confessions not like holidays, but like bread. He hesitated, promised to work on himself, and for some time he really did. Become warmer, as if someone had turned up the temperature in the radiator. Then he withdrew into himself again. 2 weeks before the rupture, I started to have a strange feeling, as if a third sound had appeared in the apartment. At first it was barely audible, then annoying. It was the sound of an incoming notification which I couldn't catch. All my notifications were grouped, while for him almost all were turned off. But sometimes I noticed how a thin white icon with a small ghost flashed in his hand. He always immediately turned off the screen. I grinned, a grown man and a childish thing where everything disappears. You in at 15? I teased. Oh, come on, that's nonsense. He waved it off easily, too easily. On Friday evening, we were supposed to go to a mutual friend's birthday party. He came home from work tense, staring out the window where the early darkness was already piling up the houses. I probably won't be long, he said. I have to get up early in the morning. At the party, we laughed as usual. Someone retold old stories, someone told plans. And suddenly I noticed how he turned towards the kitchen, not leaving but simply leaning against the doorframe. And as if for a second he straightened his shoulders, like a person who sees one of his own. I followed his gaze and saw her, too bright for this room, like a cold light lamp among warm garlands. She raised her hand, welcomingly, casually, as if they had long been accustomed to meeting like this, without meeting. I felt a strange emptiness in my stomach, but I smiled. The evening was supposed to be easy, and I know how to be well-mannered. He didn't approach her, and she didn't approach. But between them, it seemed, a thin thread was stretched, which for some reason only I noticed. Already at night, when we were walking home, he talked about music, about someone's funny sneakers, and I heard an evenness in his voice too, even for the late hour. At home, he quickly went into the shower, stood for a long time under the hot water, and when he came out, he looked at me the way people look when they are afraid to linger. Briefly, softly, with evasive tenderness, I fell asleep in fits and starts. I woke up in the early morning from that same third sound. He was in the living room. On the shelf was his phone, forgotten the night before. Even this was not his style, to leave the screen lit up as if someone in the neighboring apartment had flicked a switch and the number 1 crawled out on a white ghost. I don't remember when exactly I stopped breathing. I just lay there and listened to my own heart. Like a train that flies into the station without brakes, I didn't want to be the person who goes through someone else's phone. I had been cultivating this proud role of trusting for a long time, but I could already hear the house settling, and I realized that if I didn't look now, I would always live on this shaking table, stroking the cup so it wouldn't jump off. I stood up slowly, as if the ice was cracking beneath me. I picked up the phone. My palm sweated instantly, and the screen obediently unlocked. Later, I would remember that tiny shock, as if a door that should have been locked had suddenly swung open by itself. There was a new world on the screen. Icons I didn't know, accounts that duplicated themselves, and that same white ghost that blinked patiently like a traffic light. I clicked on it. In the chat list, there were names, some with emoji, some without, and one name that couldn't be used to describe a random acquaintance, the same one he had once pronounced in the past tense, like a diagnosis left over from another life. The preview of the message showed a fragment of the phrase, "Remember that day on," and then it was cut off. I felt a hatch opening in my chest, cold rising from it, and the sound in the apartment died down completely. It was too quiet around for it not to be true. I clicked open. The chat had the feeling of someone else's apartment. The furniture seemed familiar but turned at a strange angle. At the top were short, disappearing lines, as if someone had written on the glass with a finger and then erased it with a sleeve. They both liked to disappear before the words had time to harden. I feverishly scrolled through the feed, afraid that the messages would burn like paper, and I would be the culprit of their salvation, and my own misfortune. Remember that day on. The open message was supplemented with, "Vika's birthday? I'm still laughing at how you dropped the plate and tried to catch it with your foot. Don't make me laugh, you dropped the glass yourself," he replied. Emoticons, voice flashes, rare photos with black stripes over other people's faces. Nothing criminal, until my fingers stumbled upon saved. There was something else there, as if they decided that memory is only for the special, not for disappearing. I saw a date a month ago and another one from 6 months ago, and in between, the beginnings of a story I didn't want to read. Want to go on a break? I'm in the parking lot, 5 minutes. Short, how are you? Are you okay? Dash, I miss you. Then a photo of a car's side mirror with a palm print in the corner. Then a selfie of her collarbone, cropped like she wanted it to be halfway decent, but it didn't work out. Something inside me licked the air. I probably would have run away. But I stood rooted to the spot and felt the sticky adhesiveness of other people's words on my fingers. I opened the voice. Her voice was not loud, breaking into a laugh, like when you hold a laugh in your fist. "I can't believe it's us. We promised that." And then, it hissed, disappeared. My fingers trembled, and I pressed the second. His voice, the same one next to, which I fell asleep for 7 years. "This is the last time, truth forgive." The last one is always a word with a tiny hole through which the whole next last one passes. I closed my eyes and suddenly saw both of us at that very doorframe in a friend's kitchen, how they didn't approach each other, because they had already met between the lines. He came out of the bathroom, rubbing his hair with a towel, and when he saw me with the phone, he froze like a man who suddenly understands the language of statues. The second lasted too long. I managed to grow old in it. He slowly lowered the towel, his gaze slid to the screen, and that same soft, empty horror appeared on his face when the body looks around for a door, but there is no door. "It's not what you think," he said, the first thing everyone said. and then he closed his eyes as if he himself felt ashamed of the cliché. Although, his voice broke. A wave rose inside me, but not a scream. Rather, a clarity as if someone had wiped the glass of the world. How much? I asked. And with whom? He swallowed his saliva. I noticed for the first time that he had an Adam's apple. Before that, it was just part of the man I loved and not a separate detail that could twitch. A couple of times during breaks. Then again. He fell silent and quickly added, a long time ago? It was a long time ago. The dates, I said, not raising my voice. I'll write them down if you need them. The word, write it down, cut him. He swayed as if from a physical blow, and suddenly he sat down on the edge of the sofa, put his hands on his knees, like a schoolboy who was called to the board, and began to speak. For the first 20 minutes, I lived in some other time. They contained his secret account, just so as not to interfere with work and personal life. Random correspondence with girls from the bar. Empty, I swear. One meeting with the one. I don't understand how that happened. And a second one, which was definitely the last. Then an admission that there were more. The word more sounded like a failed step. 3. I counted them like they count shards, not missing a single one, so that it would be a little safer to walk barefoot. He talked about pornography like he was taking the trash out of a dark room, not looking but carefully. Too many years, too many nights when it was easier to switch off than to talk. I thought it was safe, no one's business, he said, almost whispering, and then I started to believe it was a separate life without consequences, like a training version of me only without you. He exhaled. I was ashamed. I was embarrassed by what I liked, afraid you'd see me and leave. I looked and thought, I'm already leaving, only my body is still standing in place. Then the money came. He pulled out a folder. Yes, this lie had a folder, neat with files, and laid it on the table. Credit cards I didn't know about, personal loans he'd taken out to pay off old debts. Statements from his retirement account where the numbers had sunk like water from a bathtub. I was always going to close it all, he said quietly. I just drowned it first and then pretended to float. It seemed to me that each new fact was a stone that he was lifting from my chest, but not to make it easier. He was simply placing it on the table so that I could see its weight. Even his small lies, the one about the doctor, the diagnosis, and the prescription, by this point seemed not a trifle, but a rehearsal. He was practicing lying to me where he could with impunity, so that later he could lie where he couldn't. Why now? I asked. My voice trembled and didn't obey, like my fingers after a frost. Why are you saying all this now? He looked straight at me. There was so much panic in that look that it went over the edge and became sobriety. Because you already see everything. Because I couldn't wake up next to you anymore and pretend that you're happy. He covered his face with his palms for a second, ran his hands over it, as if trying to shake off the sleep. Because you're the only one I've ever gone to when I was scared, and now I'm scared like I've never been before. It's strange, but it was here that I suddenly felt a warm, physical pity for him, as if he were a wet dog on the threshold, trembling and reaching for a house that might not let me in, and immediately, rage, at him, at myself, at everything that we called reliability. It was as if I was holding two ends of a rope and didn't know which side to let go of so as not to tear my palms. Is that all? I asked. Or is there something else I need to hear, and not from anyone, but from you? He fell silent. There had never been such silence in our house. A whisper entered this silence. Yes, speak. He swallowed, cough. There are things in sex that I like, always liked. I didn't say because I thought you wouldn't want to know. I tried to be normal, comfortable, hid you from myself, and when hiding didn't work, I went into that black hole where nothing needs to be explained. He didn't say a single specific word, but I understood everything, that he chose the shadow over conversation, that my why from 7 years ago had an answer right now, here on our chilly carpet, and that made it even colder. I stood up. He didn't move. It seemed that if I moved, everything would collapse completely, not quietly but loudly with a crash. I need to breathe, I said. Please stay. He raised his hands as if surrendering. I'll tell you everything until the end. Just don't leave now. The coat on the hook seemed alien. I didn't know whose it belonged to, the one who was lied to, or the one who now listens to the truth. I took the keys, and the metal in my palm was icy. I'll be back, I said, not believing that it was me. But when I return, you will say everything, without last times, without I thought, without holes. And you will call the therapist today? He nodded too quickly, like a man who clings to any life preserver, even if the life preserver is made of stone. Already recorded, he whispered. I have a number, I just didn't dare. The landing smelled of dust and someone's boiled potatoes. I went down one flight, sat on the steps and rested my forehead on the railing. The world was ringing. For the first time in a long time, I heard my own breathing, short, ragged, and this new terrible question. If he is now ready to say everything, will I have enough strength to hear the last part? I closed my eyes, and in the darkness the white ghost flashed on the screen again. Following it was not his voice, but mine. What if he really has changed? What if now the life I have been asking for all 7 years begins? I didn't know what was scarier, to believe him again or to put an end to it. And it seemed, for the first time in 7 years, I allowed myself to think about the third option, about a life where my I sounds not like an echo of his we. I stood up, came back, and put the keys on the table between us. Start with the earliest, I said, and don't leave anything for later. He took a breath, like a diver who realizes he's going to have to go deeper than he wants. Okay, he said, but there's one more thing I wasn't sure I could say. He looked at me the way you look before you really confess to the last person. And in that moment, I realized his next question would change not only what I know, but who I have been all these years. I started therapy before you found out, he said, looking away, as if the words came out easier if you didn't watch them fall. 3 weeks ago, I was sneaking around. I thought, if I could fix it without burdening you with then I'd put it all back in place. I was afraid the truth would destroy you and us. It pricked me, not where the offense is, but nearby, where fatigue accumulates. It turns out he knew how to talk. He knew how to go and ask for help. Just not from me. Next, I said, the chronology of who, when, how much, and what about the money. He started with dates. Time turned out to be dirty water. The longer he poured, the murkier it became. The first accident, and at that very birthday party they didn't fit, because they had already started texting each other under the table. Then, smoke breaks that didn't smell of tobacco. 2 meetings in a car in a shopping center parking lot, briefly in a whisper with shaking hands. Haren. A long pause and only correspondence. Her voicemails from the bathroom, his from the entrance when he was taking out the trash. A couple of one-offs with others, a bar, other people's names that meant nothing, like random stones in a shoe. He said once about each one, as if the word once was an elastic band that could be used to tie a wound. He spoke about the white ghost, simply. Everything disappears there. It was easier for me not to leave traces. I myself pretended that I was living some kind of shadow, and then I returned to you pure. Clean, I repeated, tasting metal on my tongue. And the money? He pushed a folder towards me. Inside, neatly laid out numbers, which now had to be walked through like mine's secret cards, opened a year ago, to a 1.5-year transfer from the pension fund, to close everything at once, and then another loan, so as not to get caught. He said this quietly, and in this whisper, there was not so much justification as surprise. How he himself fell into the noose that he himself tied. I thought I was saving us. He squeezed his fingers as if he was holding an invisible rope. Every time, once and for all, but it turned out, time after time. I listened and built columns in my head, dates, amounts, kilometers of other people's parking. But under the numbers, the main thing was moving. What he didn't say, I waited. He understood, preferences, he swallowed. I grew up in a house where they didn't talk about such things. They talked with belts and silence. I understood very early. Desire is something that you will be shamed for. And all my life, I either hid it or pretended that I didn't have it with you. I loved you the best I could, but everything that seemed abnormal, I took to a black room in my head, and I went there alone. When that didn't help, I looked for confirmation that I wasn't a monster. In strangers, where nothing needs to be explained, where you can disappear after I'm not making excuses, I am saying this out loud for the first time. He said monster, and a strange recognition struck me, as if all my life I had seen in his eyes the shadow of some beast behind the glass, and was afraid to ask whose it was. And he was afraid to open the door, and now the door stood wide open, and the beast sat with its tail between its legs, its head down. Okay, I said. The voice came slowly, as if through wet sand. A plan. If you're going to go into this, for real, we need a plan. Without one, all this is just a pretty confession in the middle of ruins. We sat down at a table that had previously only seen grocery lists and movie lists for the evening. I laid out a notepad and pen in front of me. He seemed to exhale normally for the first time during the conversation, not wheezing. First, access phone, mail, banks. Without pathos and secrets, not because I want to control you, because your secret has already destroyed our home. I tapped my pen on the table, feeling how someone strict, businesslike was waking up in me. Second, therapy individual. You already have one group, you'll find one couples in a week as soon as I find a therapist. Third, money, everything on the table. We divide it, make a repayment plan, I decide if I'm ready to drag this along with you. He nodded too quickly. I stopped him with a look. And one more thing, if something else comes up, you speak up right away. Not after last time, not after I thought. Right away, I can't stand another in 20 minutes. Do you understand? I understand, he whispered. He reached for my hand and immediately pulled it away as if he'd been burned. Thank you for even sitting here. You have the right to leave. I know, I said, and my own honesty made me feel scared. This knowledge is like a cold key in your pocket. You feel its weight even if you don't take it out. Then followed a day that felt like a slow sobering up. We ate dinner for the first time in silence, and this silence was not a wall. Rather, we were both standing on the scaffolding, assembling a new dictionary. He gave me the passwords. I wrote them down clearly, writing the letters so that my hand could keep up with my head. We called the bank. I listened in advance to the polite girl operator, whose voice knew nothing about other people's ruined kitchens. Then I sorted his debts by due date like laundry in drawers. This can take a long time to wash. This by hand, and this it's better to throw away, if you have the strength to admit that the thing is ruined. The night was long. I lay and listened to him breathing next to me, evenly as always, and thought about how in the same second you can love and hate the same face waves washed over me. First anger, sticky, warm, then pity, cold, like tap water, then emptiness. When anger rose, I remembered the mirrors of his car, the fogged, up windows, other people's parking lots. When pity came, a boy in a house where desires are burned with belts. When emptiness, I saw myself from the outside, a woman in the dark on her own bed whose compass was broken. In the morning I decided, therapist. I found the name that friends recommended and dialed. A soft voice on the other end suggested the nearest window in 3 days. I said, we need it sooner. There was understanding in the voice, like in a blanket that covers the head. We were registered in a day we arrived together. The office smelled of something citrusy. There were wooden figurines on the shelf. A mother, a father, a child, and another one, lonely. I stared at the last one, and the therapist smiled thinly. He began first, and surprisingly, I felt better because I could remain silent. He was saying what he had already said to me at home, only softer, more structured, as if the words spoken in this space stopped tearing my skin. The therapist asked questions, not sharp, but precise. Where in the body does shame live? What does it smell like? What does it take to leave a black room without touching the switch? I looked at the man with whom I shared my life and saw in him both my husband and an unfamiliar person who was trying to learn to call things by their proper names. It was a strangely beautiful sight and unbearably bitter. Are you afraid to leave? The therapist suddenly asked me. I nodded. And afraid to stay? Yes, both fears are equal in weight, I said. But one is about who I will be without him, and the other is about who I will remain next to him. Then we'll need boundaries, he said simply, permissions and prohibitions and time. At home, we began a small, almost absurd life. I wrote on a piece of paper, triggers. And below that, the smell of auto-washing liquid, nights in the shower for 40 minutes, phone face down, the word last. He took a marker and added, silence. When I go into it, hit me with words, he said crookedly, or just say, come back. We agreed no casual meetings at work, where she is, if unavoidable, a warning, a call before and after. Without flapping wings, he wrote this same white ghost a long message. Without jabs, without, you misunderstood me. Reading aloud, he stumbled like on stones. I stopped communicating any. This has destroyed what is important to me, I will not answer. Then he deleted the account. I watched the white face disappear and thought, it's a pity that in life there is no delete traces button. On the second evening, we looked through old photographs. Paradoxically, he suggested it himself. Let's look only at the ones where you smile. I laughed and at the same time wanted to cry. In some pictures, I saw a strange thing, as if my smile was trembling slightly, like a string stretched too tightly. Then, 7, 5, 3 years ago, I didn't see it. Now I saw it, and I didn't know what to do with this knowledge. Sometimes I caught his gaze, not frightened, not pleading, but attentive, like a person who is learning to read me again. Intonations, pauses, a wrinkle near the lips when I want to say, everything is fine. But I'm lying. He began to talk more than ever, about the child inside him, about fears, about how in the morning it is most stuffy on the chest, because every day is now like an exam. I listened and thought, if he had come to me with this 2 years ago, we might have gone through it differently. But even then he couldn't, and neither could I. A week later, he brought a printed plan for paying off debts. No heroism, honestly. This is how much I spend per month. This is where I will cut back. This is where I asked for an installment plan. I looked at the numbers, and for the first time in all this time, I felt not pain, but a dull hope. It smelled of boiling buckwheat and a quiet Monday. I can handle it. I started touching him sometimes, not often in passing. Like you check the warmth of a cup. He didn't reach out, didn't catch. He just stayed in place like a tree you get used to leaning against. And still inside me lived a figure that whispered, he's a liar. I didn't argue. I listened to it and said out loud, yes, he was a liar. I can see it. Now he's talking, I'll check. This, it seemed, was my only real cure, not to pass judgment in advance. One evening we were sitting in the kitchen, each with a cup of tea. The rain was splashing by the window. I was reading articles about trauma. He was reading printouts of exercises from his therapy. And suddenly that same third sound. It sounded rarely now. We turned off everything we could. My whole body shuddered. He did too. This is mine, he said calmly and slowly turned the phone screen up. On the screen was a payment notification. Debt repayment. I exhaled. We both smiled timidly, like children who are allowed to sit in the living room without an adult for the first time. And it was in that translucent, fragile second, when everything was just beginning to come together, so shamefully, that another sound was heard. Dull, confident, his old mailbox, which he hadn't closed, and which we had forgotten to remove from synchronization. A notification popped up on the screen. New message. From a name that I seemed to have already blurted out of my head. From her. He froze, I did too. We looked at the small rectangle like a snake crawling across the tablecloth. The preview showed the first line. You promised to tell her yourself I don't want to be a monster, but... Hot blood rose to my face. I thought I could hear my internal barometer falling. He slowly picked up the phone, not letting it go on the table, as if he was afraid the surface would burn. I don't... He began and stopped short. I extended my hand. Give me. He didn't let go right away, and in that not right away there was so much of the past that my fingers trembled. Finally, he put the phone in my palm. I looked at the screen, at the open button, at the cursor blinking next to his name, as if someone on the other side was already typing the next one. The therapist talked about choices that stretch time. Now the seconds dragged on like caramel. I felt all three waves rising inside me again: anger, pity, and emptiness. And a fourth, new one standing on the shore: curiosity, which made me feel ashamed I didn't know what I would see. Proof that he was still lying? Or that the truth was more than he could bear at home, looking at me? Or the finishing detail that would break all the little that we managed to collect in a week? I pressed, the screen shook, and the first word of the letter was my name. I saw only the beginning. You don't know me, but you have the right to know everything. It wasn't a couple of times, and the most important thing is not what happened then, but what he did recently. I turned my gaze to him. His face became pale and red at the same time. His eyes were shining like those of a man who had already fallen into that very black room, and I would have to get out of it if I wanted anyone to come out at all. "What did you do recently?" I asked so quietly that I barely heard myself. He opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed, and for the first time in all this time, I saw on his face not panic confusion, but something like a decision, as if a switch had clicked inside him. "Before you finish reading," he said, "I must tell you myself." I clutched my phone. The next button was blinking on the screen, and it was then that I realized that the next sentence, not the letter or its justification, would be what determined which shore we would ultimately land on. "Let me tell you." He exhaled and put his palms on the table, as if showing that he was empty. "A week ago, I met her. After the first session, I thought, to close. To tell her in person that it was over, that now I would be honest, I went without warning. It was stupid and cowardly. I told her that between us it was the end. And then we kissed by the car once, and I left. That's all." The words fell on the table in a neat pile, as if he had rehearsed them in advance. A small nerve began to jump in my throat. "Close," I repeated. "You went to close, but opened another door. And you didn't tell me or the therapist about it." He nodded. It seemed to me a very small, childish nod. I was scared, I thought. If I tell, then everything I did this week will be worthless. That you will leave immediately. I wrote to her later so that she would not write to you. I said that I would tell myself. And I did not say. I looked down at the screen and finished reading the letter. It was written surprisingly calmly, without venom, like a report. "You don't know me, but you have the right to know everything. It happened more than a couple of times. He asked me to delete the correspondence. He came in person a week ago. He said that he loves you and ends everything. We kissed. I want him to be honest. If he chooses you, it should be his choice, not mine and not yours." Signed, her short name without dramatic signs. It's strange, but I felt anger not at her. At him, yes, at myself, too. But in front of her, I felt respect. Maybe this is what the first adult thing in this story looked like: a woman who decided not to be another person's secret. "Was there anything else recently?" I asked. He exhaled, clenched his fingers. "I took another small amount after our conversation. To cover the penalty on the card, I was afraid to admit that I would destroy the fragile. This scheme 200 and something, I have already returned half. It's funny, it was here, at 200 and something, that I was shaken more than at kissed, not the amount, the principle itself. When we were already drawing the plan, putting in the rails, he managed to slip past them, like a child through a hole in the fence. The silence in the apartment became dense, not like before, viscous, protecting from conversations, but as if the air had thickened, because further words had to be cut with a knife. I stood up, went to the window. On the glass, the rain drew diagrams that immediately disappeared. "I don't know if I can live in a constant check mode," I finally said. "I can. I will survive, but it won't be life. It will be security service, and I don't want to be your guard." "I understand," he said quickly. "I'll fix everything. I'm ready to leave." If it makes you feel better, I turned around. This phrase, "ready to leave," struck with unexpected care or manipulation. I could no longer immediately distinguish, but suddenly I had a clear, like a stationary knife, thought, I need a space where I will not be a guard. Neither him, nor our community, nor my own guilt. We need a break, I said, not as a punishment, as a sanitary corridor. Therapeutic separation. I remembered the words from the session. You will move out for 3 months as much as we can. No contacts, only on business. You continue therapy and the group was mine. The money on according to plan, but I am not a controller. You bring reports yourself once a week in writing. After 3 months, we sit down with a therapist and see what is alive with us. If you want to be with me, you will endure. If not, it is better to find out now. He nodded, this time like an adult. I agree, he said, and suddenly smiled, very tiredly and very sincerely. Thank you for leaving me at least some chance. I'm leaving myself a chance, I corrected softly, to understand who I am without your shame on my shoulders. The packing turned out to be shorter than I expected, maybe because we never like to save things. He packed 3 t-shirts, 2 shirts, jeans, books, and that same folder I helped silently. At the door he hesitated as if looking for a place in the space for the word forgive, and said something else. I will work, not for the sake of come back, for the sake of not lying, even if you don't stay. Okay, I replied, work. The door closed quietly, the house didn't collapse. It changed the sound, as if a resonant object had been taken out of it and a new timbre remained. Emptiness. I went into the kitchen and sat on the floor, leaning against the cabinet. I couldn't cry. The tears got stuck somewhere under my skin. Thick as resin, I just sat and listened. To my breathing, the refrigerator, the rain, someone's TV through the wall. And for the first time in a long time, not his steps. The first few days I lived by a list that my therapist and I called the minimum of life. Eat, drink water, go outside, do one thing for yourself. Not something useful, but something pleasant. Pleasant included patchwork things, trim the ends of my hair, buy oranges, replant the monstera. I returned and listened to the house. It learned to sound like me. In my notebook, I drew strange graphs. It's easier in the morning. It's overwhelming in the evening. The trigger is the sound of a notification on the bus. Opposite were my anti-panics. To start something with my hands, to call a friend, to bury my face in the neighbor's dog in the yard. She mistook me for her own on the very first day. At night, I wrote letters, not to him, but to myself, the one who entered into this marriage 7 years ago. You wanted simplicity. You got exactly that, where you didn't want to see complexity. It's not your fault that you trusted, and you don't have to go back to where life depends on someone's last times. I put the sheets of paper in a shoebox and thought, it's strange how much paper weighs without a single number on it. He sent reports once a week, briefly. Group, 2 meetings, individual, 1, debt, minus such and such amount, contacts. No, not a single, I miss you, how are you? I think sometimes. I asked a clarifying question like, an accountant. And closed the chat. I slowly grew a muscle that was not there before. The muscle of non-response. Where before I rushed to save, now, went to drink water and painted my nails, and in this was salvation. One Tuesday he sent a photo, a certificate from the group with crooked signatures, a date and a seal that looked like a drunken son. I caught myself smiling, not at him, but at the paper. The paper that had something you could touch with your hands, unlike the disappearing messages. Then I immediately felt a chill rise inside. I was looking for evidence again. I closed the phone and took a breath until 10. It was another company fight, this time with myself. Sometimes I was overwhelmed by memories. We were on the embankment, tea in a paper cup, the wind like a clean sheet. I looked at myself in this frame and asked, is this a lie? And I answered myself, no, this is the happiness of that day. It took me time to separate what was and what I now know about it. The therapist said at one of the sessions, memory is not a note from the prosecutor. This is an album. You have the right to move the photographs to other fields. Believed it, I began to change the signatures. By the end of the 2nd month, I woke up for the first time and didn't remember him for the first 3 minutes. Those 3 minutes were like a small island. I made coffee, went out onto the balcony where one of the neighbors was drying white sheets, and thought, I am. Without us, without him, just me. It was so simple and so strange that I wanted to laugh and cry. I allowed myself to do both, stupidly wrinkling my nose in the wind. In the third month, he asked for a meeting subtly, formally. We need to sign the installment plan documents. Can I bring it to you or meet in a cafe? I reread the message several times and replied, in a cafe in front of people. Half an hour. He sent, okay. We sat by the window, each with his own mug. He had lost weight. His gaze was clearer, on his arm was a leather bracelet I had never seen before. It smelled of tobacco and mint, a familiar absurdity. He placed the folder between us, not as a shield, but as an object. I found another group, he said without pride, simply stating the fact, and I changed jobs. There are no intersections, and I told the therapist about that kiss. Okay, I replied. I really thought, this is good. No pros or cons, just a step. We were silent. Someone was laughing in the cafe. A boy was riding a scooter outside, his green cord flashing. I'm not asking for anything, he said. No decision now. I'm grateful for these 3 months, for giving me a chance to do a job that wasn't about come back, but about become honest. I became. As much as I can, I'll keep going, even if your answer is no. I looked at his face for a long time and noticed how one of his usual things had disappeared, the readiness to please at any cost. He sat up straight, did not slouch, and there was none of that plasticine from which he used to mold the necessary shapes. And suddenly it became very quiet for me, as if the extra music inside me had been turned off. I have an answer, I said. Not final forever, but good enough for me now. He nodded. I won't go back, not now. Maybe never, the words sounded without a sharp edge. I thought a lot about what it means to give marriage a chance. And I realized that in fact I was giving you a chance first of all. To grow up. You're growing up. And that's good, but I need a life where I don't hold the wall with my fingers so the house doesn't sink. I want a house that stands on its own and let me build it alone. He looked down and up again, and in his eyes there was respect and sadness, calm, not panicked. It's honest, he said. It hurts, but honest. Thank you. Thank you for stopping being a shadow, I replied. That was the scariest thing of all, living next to a shadow. We signed the papers. When I stood up, he stood up too, but didn't move towards me. I took my bag, and for a second we were close. So close that all our past habits echoed in my head. Hugging, kissing on the temple, whispering, hold on. I smiled and said something else. You can do it without me. And you too, he said. On the way out, I lingered on the threshold. It was raining behind the glass. Thin, even, like a line under a sum, I stretched out my hand, felt cold sparks on my palm. I took a ring out of my pocket and turned it over. It was warm because it lay on my skin. At some point I thought to take it off, throw it on the table, make a gesture that would end the scene. But now I just put the ring in a small box that I bought yesterday and put it in my bag. Not as a renunciation like an item from an album. Its place is in another section. At home, I took the sheet of paper triggers off the wall. I looked at the neat list and suddenly smiled. At the bottom I wrote, silence is not an enemy. And I glued a new sheet of paper, supports. In the first paragraph, I wrote, do not explain someone else's lies with your own inadequacy. In the second, do not confuse pity and love. In the third, it's empty. I left a space. I wanted my future to have lines for what I don't know yet. In the evening on the balcony, I brewed the tea too strong and decided not to dilute it. The smell of wet asphalt rose from the street, mixing with the aroma of basil from the pot. In the neighboring window, a girl was painting blue windows on yellow houses with gouache. I looked and thought, I still know how to love, not his world myself. People who write letters when it's time to stop being someone else's secret, therapists who teach us to put commas where we used to put ellipses, and men who, perhaps, will one day come into my life not as a mystery, but as a person. I took a notebook and wrote the last paragraph of the letter to myself from 7 years ago. You were not mistaken when you believed. The mistake is not to see that faith is not an oath of silence, but the right to ask questions. You asked them. You heard the answer. You chose yourself. This is not a departure from love. This is a return home. The night became very quiet. I lay down and felt how the house finally stood on its own, without my fingers on the walls. Outside the window, the rain broke into small, almost invisible dots. Somewhere from far away came a short notification sound, someone else's. I smiled and turned the phone screen up. It was silent. I closed my eyes and sleep came not as salvation, but as an ordinary human thing. In the morning, I woke up to the light. It was warm, clear, like a new leaf. I cooked oatmeal, signed up for a ceramics class, called my mother. At noon, I arranged the books on the shelf, not in alphabetical order, but by color, for the sake of beauty. When an old song quietly played from the speaker in the kitchen, I caught myself humming, and there was no crackle in my voice. It was whole. Sometimes perhaps our house collapses quietly, but it is also built, also without fanfare, from small honesties, from cups that stand confidently on the table, even when no one is holding, or them from the silence in which you can live. And if I am ever asked what helped me to leave or to stay, I will say, it helped me stop living between who he was and who he will become. It helped me choose who I will be, here now, and to find myself in a place where memory does not poison the future, but simply becomes a page that is turned. I closed the notebook. A drop of rain glistened on the cover. I ran my finger over it and smiled at the dot in its place.